iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Charlamagne Tha God is obviously the co-host of The Breakfast Club, but more in my world, the co-founder of our huge new launch and joint venture called The Black Effect. Charlamagne, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, man.
Connell, thank you for having me, my brother. What's happening?
I'm doing okay. I live in a very sort of humdrum, no big news county in Georgia called DeKalb County, which was not ready for its close-up, but one rarely is.
DeKalb County did a lot in regards to flipping the state of Georgia blue. They showed up in a real way.
I know, it's weird. I grew up in a city called Berkeley, California. I moved to the South about 20 years ago. And to be very candid about it, growing up in a state as blue as California and moving to a state as red as Georgia, I never knew what it meant to have your vote really, really count. And so it's a new layer of pressure that I'm still getting used to, but it is what it is. Listen, the thing I think is really interesting about podcasting is that at least still and so far, no one has started out as a podcaster. This medium is young enough and new enough that we all came from something else. We did something else before this. And I think it brings just this crazy diversity of experience to brainstorm sessions, to partnerships, to new shows that we launch. But maybe go even back before what you were doing before podcasting. Where do you come from to begin with? How did you get into audio?
I got into audio because, I am a radio veteran. Last year at the Breakfast Club, we got inducted into the National Radio Hall of Fame. And for somebody like me who started off as an intern in Charleston, South Carolina at Z93 Jams in 1998, so I've been doing radio for 23 years at this point, to be a 23-year veteran and get inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame, that's great, but that's essentially how I got into the audio business. I got into the audio business because of radio. I was living in Moncks Corner, South Carolina, where I'm from. I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, raised in Moncks Corner, and I grew up in a pretty good household. It's one of those things where you don't realize you're poor. You just it's just what you know. So you grow up in a single wide trailer. Me and my mom and my dad and my older sister at the time, until my two younger brothers and younger sister came, and we go to my grandmother's house, who wasn't in a trailer, but it was one of those like little small sovereign homes, you know what I mean? So it's just one of those situations where you don't even realize that you're poor and disenfranchised, and because we always have food, always had clothes on my back. And, my mother was an English teacher. My father is what I call an entrepreneur. He did a little bit of everything. So he did, construction was his main thing, but he also, he sold drugs at one point. He also used drugs at one point. So he was a very do as I say, not as I do kind of person. So when I did, start running the streets and getting in trouble, it started with, acting up in school. And then, once I got kicked out of two high schools, Berkeley High School and Stratford High School, I just started running the streets. I didn't have to do that. I wasn't one of those kids that, just didn't have any other options. I chose to make the poor choices I was making and hang around the wrong crowd. And, it cost me. It cost me by, me going to jail a few times for drug offenses and, being with people who were pointing and presenting firearms, so just really being in the wrong place at the wrong time around the wrong people cost me. So my dad used to always say to me, if you don't change, in order to change your life, you got to change your lifestyle. And he would always tell me that if I don't change my lifestyle, I'm going to end up in jail, dead, or broke sitting under the tree. That was his thing, those three things. So when I actually started going to jail myself and then seeing friends of mine actually go to prison for, 4 or 5 years at a time, or seeing people around me actually die, get killed, and, actually seeing older cousins I look up to broke under the tree, I was like, yo, my dad is right. I just saw my life at that moment 10 years later if I didn't change. So I made a conscious decision to say, man, I am going to just start sowing seeds of positivity in my life. I'm leaving the streets alone. I'm gonna get a job. I was never the type of person that you know, let my mind say, okay, just because I have these felonies doesn't mean I can't get a job. So I ended up working at a warehouse called Industrial Acoustics Company. I worked at a flower garden. I worked at a clothing store in the mall called Demo. I did telemarketing. I was the guy that would call your house and try to sell you 10 CDs for a penny, you know? And, you know, like most brothers in the hood, I wanted to rap. And the reason I wanted to rap is because the people who I saw on TV that looked like me, that was successful, were usually in sports and entertainment. And so I was at this recording studio one night, and I met a guy by the name of Willie Will. And Willie Will, he was a local radio personality at Z93 Jams. And I literally just asked him, this is 1998. I'm like, yo, how did you get on the radio? And he was like, well, I started off as an intern. And I'm like, you know, how do I get an internship? And he was just like, just go down there and fill out the internship papers. And I'm like, is that easy? Like, I don't have to be in school or nothing? Now, mind you, this is 1998, Charleston, South Carolina. It's way, the process of entry is way different now. But at the time, I went down there. My wife, my now wife, drove me down there. Because my license was suspended at the time, and I filled out the internship papers, and I got an internship. And I worked my way from interning to, you know, being in the promotions department, which is essentially just a paid internship. And, you know, I used to run my mouth so much and be hanging around the station so much that, you know, the music director, Ron White, just asked me one day, he was like, yo, you ever thought about being on the radio? Because the other jocks would let me get on the air. I mean, the reason they would let me get on the air is because, you know, everybody smoked weed. I knew where to get the weed. I would have weed on me. So they just wanted me around. So they would open up the microphones and let me talk. And Ron was like, yo, you should do radio. You should be on the air. And I was like, I did. So I started off Sunday mornings, voice tracking, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. That didn't last long because South Carolina is the Bible Belt. So you got this, you know, ghetto dude with a lisp, you know, calling himself to God on Sunday mornings and yelling and screaming at people, you know, just because I didn't know how to have a conversational tone yet. So I was just fresh off the block. And so they moved me to Saturday night, 7 p.m. to 12 a.m. where all that yelling and screaming worked because, you know, I was getting the city hype. And, you know, one of the best things that ever happened to me was I did not know how to do radio. I didn't go to college for this. I didn't have any formal training. So literally I was just talking like we would talk in the hood. And so the show got really popular really fast in Charleston, South Carolina. And that's how I got into the audio business.
There's a lot there, man.
That's why you got to buy a book. Black Privilege, New York Times bestseller. Been out for a few years.
My favorite bit of that may be that the reason you got kicked off of Sunday mornings was because your name was Charlamagne Tha God in the Bible Belt. But we'll leave it. You still had something special though, and maybe instinctive, which was the art of conversation, the art of the human voice. You know, I'm first generation Irish. My mom and dad are from Ireland. I grew up in a house where the art of the conversation was taken very seriously. The human voice was an art, was a skill, if you will. What about you? Do you track that back to your very beginnings of like, yeah, we told a lot of stories, we had a lot of conversations. Anything like that you can track it back to?
Man, you know, that's interesting because I never thought about that, but yeah, because you know when I was young. You know, I'm 42, so you know there was no social media. You know what I mean? Like we was sitting around on the porch talking. That's how I came up. I came up listening to my father telling stories and my uncles telling stories and my grandma telling stories. Like that's literally what we do. That was one of my favorite pastimes. One of my favorite pastimes was when everybody was sitting around under the tree. I'm the little kid eavesdropping on all these things I shouldn't be hearing. You know,
what kind of stories would they tell that you shouldn't be hearing?
Oh, a bunch of stuff that'll get us canceled now. Come on, you talking about old, you know, sovereign black men. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sitting around drinking alcohol and you know doing whatever else they was doing that I didn't know what they were doing at the time. It's like, a lot of things. I was taught wrong about a lot of things. You know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, it definitely was storytelling. You would hear definitely family stories from like my grandmother and you know. My mother, they'd be telling us stuff about how things used to be. My grandma's favorite line was, she's never seen the world the way it is now, which is so crazy because she passed away in 2006. So I wonder what she would make of things now. I think about that often. But yeah, that definite art of storytelling, absolutely, I would have to attribute to my southern upbringing because that's all we did was sit around and have conversation, which is still one of my favorite things to do now. Like it's like, yo, put your phone down, you know, turn the TV off, let's go have dinner and you know, drink some alcohol and talk. That's what I like to do with my friends and family.
I mean, I see it today with my own kids. I have 4 kids. They are very into screens, but I still feel like I never engage with them as much, and I maybe I'm imposing this on them. I never feel like they're quite as fulfilled as when we just have a really good conversation, the sound of the human voice. And I've heard this across a lot of these speaker sessions. Malcolm Gladwell put it this way a few months ago, where he was like, I don't know that I'll ever write a book again. It's just there's something about the sound of the human voice in an audiobook that conveys information in a way through stories that's hard to replicate it. But
Malcolm, that might be a little bit of cap coming from Malcolm. Cap means a slight fabrication because Malcolm sold like 1 million copies.
I know.
Talking to Strangers audio. I wouldn't ever write a book again if I sold that many audio wise. Like, stop, Malcolm. Knock it off.
That's fair. I only know what cap means because of those same children I referenced a few minutes ago. But you're right. It may be easier for him to say that. But listen, I think what maybe less people know, more now than ever, but maybe less people know, is that you are also a veteran in podcasting. This medium has been around maybe officially for about 15 years. The iHeartRadio podcast team's been making shows for a long time, but so have you. You jumped into this medium 7-8 years ago with a show called Brilliant Idiots. You made several episodes of another show called Sibling Rivalry. Point is, you were in this much earlier than a lot of your peers in radio, and you didn't just dabble in it. You didn't say, I'll try a couple podcasts and then go away for several years. You stuck with a podcast and grew it. Lots of questions, like why take on that extra work? What was it about podcasting that attracted your attention as like, this might be a thing?
Well, I have to give my man Chris Monroe a lot of credit for that. Chris Monroe was actually he was our producer for the Breakfast Club weekend syndicated show. So he was doing that, but he also was an owner of a podcast network called the Loudspeaker Network. And just over the course of some months and some years, just he would always tell me like, yo, you need to do a podcast. You need to do a podcast. And I'm not gonna lie, my ego was like, why? I do radio. I do morning radio in New York every day, Monday through Friday. Why the hell would I do a podcast? Podcast is for people who can't get on the radio. Like, that's what my mind was saying to me. And then I remember going to do the Combat Jack show. God bless the dead. My man Reggie Osei. I went to do the show. That was a Loudspeaker Network show. And I did it, and I got a reaction from it, right? But so I was just like, okay, maybe there is something to this podcast thing. And then I even think about people like the Reed, Kid Fury and Crystal. They was on Loudspeaker and they were making a lot of impact. And so me and my guy Andrew Schultz, who's a comedian, we were working at MTV2 at the time, and me and him have such great conversations, right? And I was just like, man, if I do it, I'm gonna have Andrew as my partner, and plus I wanted a way to kind of like help him elevate his voice. And so we just started doing it, like, 7 years ago. I think it was 2013. Well, 8 years ago now, like 2013. And the first episode, I put it out, and I had my friend on there, Jasmine Waters. God bless the dead. She transitioned last year as well. When we put it out, it had like 50,000, 60,000 listens in a week.
Yeah.
And for me, I was like, man, that's crazy, because when you get on the radio, these radio stations already have a built-in audience. All you got to do is maintain that and grow it, right? With podcasts, I don't know if people want to listen to me just because they care about what I say. People might just care about what I say because I'm on the radio. With this, when I put that out, and it was 60,000 people that listened to it in a week, I was like, people actually care what I got to say, and and then we just kept doing them, and next thing you know, we're doing live shows and we're selling merchandise. And, 7 years later, you a 7-figure a year business. And you're like, oh, yeah. Like every time I get a check from Brilliant Idiots, it's literally like, I'm just looking at it like, yo, people pay us for this? Like, like we get paid for this? Like, it's actually kind of mind blowing. But yeah, I mean, I love talking. I love communicating with people. Thankfully, I push my ego to the side, and I'm also a person that's never willing to try new things, because the worst that can happen is it doesn't work. So being that Chris was hounding me about it so bad, I was just like, yo, why not try it? And I mean, I'm glad that I listened to him.
But you saw this over the last 7-8 years. You had a front row seat as this medium exploded. It went from a relatively niche emerging medium to now you have 110 million Americans a month listening to a podcast. It's right at that level where it's way past emerging medium now. But it's also fair to say that across that 10, 15 years of growth, you saw something broken with the medium too. Mm-hmm. And you reached out to iHeartRadio about a year ago, and you had this idea, big idea. I've said this to you before, but it feels almost like the idea arrived fully formed, like you had been thinking about it for a while as a way to try to start to fix what is a diversity issue in podcasting. It doesn't feel like a medium that was welcoming or supportive of diverse creators, of Black creators specifically in your case. Where did this come from? Why was this so urgent for you all of a sudden to say, okay, we got to jump in and try to start to fix this?
Well, it was my time at the Loudspeaker Network. Loudspeaker wasn't, it was partially Black owned because, Combat Jack was Black, Reggie Osei, and, Chris was an owner as well. And they to me at the time had the most diverse programming. You had The Read, which is hosted by Kid Fury and Crystal. Both of them are, members of the LGBT community, Black man, Black woman. And then, the Brilliant Idiots came along, and then your Combat Jack was doing the hip hop. He was having these really in-depth hip hop conversations. And I was paying attention to that. And then I started looking at all of these other networks popping up. You had, Bill Simmons with The Ringer, and, you had, Gimlet. And then I started to see these companies trying to come in and get these podcasts to come behind a paywall. And that's when I really started paying attention, when they started knocking on our door at Loudspeaker and, Brilliant Idiots in particular, and, wanting to pay us, to be behind a paywall, right? And I'm looking, the numbers they were offering, it was 7 figures, but we were making more than that in advertising. So it wasn't, no reason to really jump. Plus I started thinking to myself, podcasts shouldn't be behind a paywall. It felt very satellite radio-ish. No disrespect to satellite radio, but there's a difference between terrestrial and satellite. And the fact you got to pay for satellite still makes terrestrial a lot more attractive. So I wasn't keen to get behind a paywall. So I just started thinking man, number one, you got to have a network, and I want to have a network full of diverse Black voices, right? A network that's really, for us, by us. But number two, I don't want that network behind a paywall.
Yeah.
So that's just the vision. That's just the vision I had. So over the years, I was just sitting back, watching, observing, watching what different players were doing in the space, and I knew that. I knew what my contract was. I knew I had a 5-year deal. I knew, what I mean. So it was just a matter of 2020 came, and it was time to renegotiate. This was part of the negotiations. This is what I want to do, and iHeart. But they believe in me, not only as a talent, but they believe in me as a creative. They believe in me as an executive, and they empowered me in that way.
What was really startling to me was, first of all, not just us trying to start to fix a diversity problem in podcasting, but also the diversity of the content that you greenlit and onboarded. So it's not just, I think a lot of people, for starters, might think, oh, okay, a Black creators podcast network. That's going to be mostly about social justice issues, right? Mm-hmm. And that is totally wrong. Actually, you started to greenlight shows that were Michelle Williams in mental health, Jess Hilarious in comedy, Dwight Howard in sports, business and finance, travel. And I kept hearing you and the president of the network, Dolly Bishop, use these words. I just want to create a space that lets Black creators be unapologetically Black, regardless of the genre they want to work in. Mm-hmm. I assume that was a big part of this for you from the get-go?
Yeah, because, we always say Black people are not monolithic, but that what does that mean? We know what it means, but we got to show that, and the way that we show that is by showing this diversity of thought from these Black thought leaders. And I have to, I have to give my mom a lot of credit, because my mom was an English teacher, and my mom, since the beginning, since I can remember, a kid, kindergarten, first grade, she would always tell me, read things that don't pertain to me. Mm. So I was the guy that would go in the library, especially because of the Book It program, because, you read 4 free books, you get a pizza. So I was the guy that would go in there, and I read every Judy Blume book. because I'm looking, that don't pertain to me. This is about little white girls and little white kids, you know what I mean? So I would read every Judy Blume book, every Beverly Cleary book, you know. Then I started reading about UFOs and Sasquatch. And then when I got older and got into hip hop, I'm reading The Source and Double XL. And my dad's giving me like the autobiography of Malcolm X and, you know, Message to the Black Man by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And then I start getting into self-help books like The Secret by Rhonda Byrne and 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene and, you know, Seed of the Soul by Gary Zukav. So I'm taking in all of this different information, and you know, that's how I've always been. And I have to give my mom credit for that, because of her, I have curiosity in so many different things. Like, and I like to be challenged. I don't like to, you know, feel comfortable with something. So that was a no-brainer. Like, yeah, I'm into mental health and mindfulness. I just launched my foundation today, the Mental Wealth Alliance. You know, well, I just announced it. I'd already launched it, but I just announced it today. I'm into social justice, you know. I'm into sports. I'm into comedy. Like, these are things that are just natural extensions of me and what I do. So of course I want the best in the field who have something to say about those things on the Black Effect.
One thing that really surprised me when we jumped into this about 6 months ago in earnest, and we actually started to go out, talk to people, other creators, about jumping in on the Black Effect, being a part of it, whether it's a pre-existing show like All the Smoke or a new creator to podcasting like Jess Hilarious, was your credibility with these other creators. And I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's kind of a weird question, but where do you think that comes from? I swear, Charlamagne, every conversation I would have would usually at some point, I would get back the words, well, I trust Charlamagne implicitly. I'd do anything for the guy. So this sounds great. I'm in. And to the point where it started to startle me. Where do you think that comes from? Why do you think, how did you maintain that?
Well, I think, you know, in the hood, we say my face called clean, you know, and honestly, that just comes from treating people right, man, treating people with respect. Like, you know, my grandmother beat it in my head when I was young, manners will take you where money won't. And, you know, I try to treat people the way that I would want to be treated. You know what I mean? Regardless of, you know, what performative things you may have seen me do early on in my radio career. Like, when the mics aren't on, when the mics are off, it's like, it's love, it's respect. You know, I give people the energy that I would want to get back, you know. And, you know, I think that I attempt to pour into people, you know, the way I would want people to pour into me, because I have been poured into. Like, there were people that, you know, gave me opportunities and put me in positions when I was, you know, coming up, and I didn't even understand why I was in these rooms. To be totally honest, I had no idea. So it's like I meet these different people in my journey, and I show them love. You know, I've had a platform, The Breakfast Club, for the past decade, you know, and I don't have a scorecard of why certain people should be on and why they shouldn't. If I think you're interested, if I find you interesting, if I think you got something funny to say, smart to say, yo, let's bring them on the platform. And, you know, I've done that with every platform that I've had, whether it's The Breakfast Club, The Brilliant Idiots, you know, my talk shows on MTV2, like Uncommon Sense, whatever it was, I've always showed people the same love that I want to get back in return. And, you know, that's, I guess it's a testament to that, because it's not, I'm not one of those people that do things and say, all right, in the future, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to ask for something. It's just like, no, I do things because I genuinely want to do them. You know what I mean? I do things and I don't expect anything back in return. And I think the love is just being reciprocated. And that means a lot to me, man. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, you know, all you have is your reputation at the end of the day. You know, so people will forget what you said. They'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. So that's what I strive to do.
We've talked about this a couple times, but I think it's worth telling because it's how I understand the words, the Black Effect. I again, back to the top of this, I live in DeKalb County, Georgia. I have a 15-year-old son. He's a white kid who lives in the suburbs of Atlanta. His favorite podcast is The Breakfast Club, right? He understands his whole world through this show. It's to the extent that he understands politics, he understands it through The Breakfast Club. It's how he understands culture. It's how he makes fashion choices sometimes. That was, for me, my first sort of true understanding of what the Black Effect means, this outsized effect of Black creators, well beyond just the Black community, actually driving culture, driving it hard, driving it all the time. What do the words the Black effect mean to you? Again, thank you, first of all, because there was no brainstorming about what this network would be called. You'd be like, no, guys, I got it. It's called the Black effect. What do those words mean to you?
It means that we control the cool. It means that when you put, Blackness into anything, there is an immediate cultural impact. There's an immediate cultural shift. I love this talk about, OG Jim Clyburn in South Carolina and how Joe Biden's campaign was struggling. And you got an OG like Jim Clyburn who got on that stage and was like, nah, this is the guy. And Black people trusted Jim Clyburn. So older Black people in the South, they went out and voted for him, Senator Kamala Harris, regardless of how you feel about her, you can't act like having that Black woman, that woman of color on the ticket didn't shift things. It didn't impact things in a major way. And if you look across the board, man, look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tom Brady, probably top 3 greatest white men to ever live, but let's not act like that coaching staff wasn't the most diverse coaching staff in the NFL. The offensive coordinator, Byron Leftwich, is Black. Defensive coordinator, Todd Bowles, is Black. And that's a thing now. So when I see people talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and they're talking about that coaching staff and how they have 4 Black, coaches, it's like, man, that should make people understand. Put some Black on it. You know what I'm saying? When you look at the Black Effect Podcast Network and you look at the fact that Dolly Bishop is a Black woman and she's the president, and this is something that's a brainchild of a Black man, and all of these Black creators and the impact we're having in this space right now, it's just like, stop scratching your head. It's not rocket science. You know what I mean? Like we have these conversations about diversity mattering, but do you really understand how much it matters? Do you really understand the effect that Blackness has on literally everything? We control the cool. So invest in Blackness.
So we've launched this thing called the Black Effect. It's the single biggest Black podcast network in the world right now. We launched it about 3-4 months ago with over 20 million downloads a month that we're able to fold under this into a media plan. We've launched 20 shows so far, another 20 to go across the rest of this year. I've never seen anything move this fast or honestly be, I think, this important to a medium that's this hot right now. For me, and we can wrap on this question, but one of the coolest parts of the whole process for me was the last mile when you and I went out and talked to potential sponsors for this thing. Who wants to jump in with us and support this? The reason I say that is because there were more predictable parts of those media plans. We'll do great host-read ads. We'll do some branded content for you. We'll drop it into all these feeds. But then it started to get really interesting. Brands started to ask you to use the creators inside the Black Effect to basically create like an advisory board to come help them with their own corporate culture, their own messaging, their own marketing plans as like a sounding board for what's good, what's bad, help us. It was something I'd never seen before on a media plan, a marketing plan. It was true partnership, not just sponsorship. Maybe talk about how that made you feel and why you were open to that, because you really were. It was pretty awesome.
Well, I was open to it simply because I hate when people try to explain things from their perspective and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. When as a radio personality, when I'm in a meeting and a consultant says, so what do 20-year-olds think about this? And I look around and there's nothing but 40-year-olds in there. I'm like, well, go get some 20-year-olds. I hate when white people try to white-splain things for Black people. I hate when men try to men-splain things for women. I hate when straight people try to straight-splain things for the LGBTQ community. It's like, no, let's go get those individuals. And, you have these corporations that have all these cultural blind spots and they make a lot of mistakes sometimes because they don't have anybody, that's not white or male, sitting at that table, So if we have access to, leaders like Tamika Mallory, if we have access to, Senator Nina Turner, Teslin Figueroa, Ebony K. Williams, like all of these people that are, on the front lines of in their respective fields, it's just like, why not bring them in? So those cultural blind spots that you have, they can help you see. Like, it's just like, let's utilize these individuals' full skill sets. They're not just our partners in the podcast space where they're talking and teaching on these podcasts. We can bring them into these boardrooms and sit them down at the table and let them teach these corporations, because, man, the only way we're going to really continue to evolve as a society is if we really have real conversation, is if we talk to each other. And we cannot be afraid to ask questions. Like, there's no such thing as a dumb question. I don't care what you think the question is. Like, the question might be so stupid to you, but I would rather you ask it, right? I would rather you ask me about something that you're feeling about, you know, Black people or Black culture. I would rather you ask me than assume, because when you assume, you're probably gonna make an ass out of yourself.
Listen, I think it's been the privilege of my career to be able to work on the Black Effect, and I really do deeply thank you for this, for taking the time today, but also just for being iHeartRadio's partner and launching this new podcast network. It means a lot to us, and we are off to a heck of a start. So thank you, Charlamagne.
Oh, thank you, Connor. And I mean, you know, this partnerships like this is what's going to help take podcasting to the next level. You know what I mean? Because I honestly think that was the other thing that was missing in the podcast world. You know, the podcast world is becoming the medium that it's in, the medium that it is, because of corporations like iHeart really investing into the podcast culture. So thank you.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.